the pirates' crew.
Yeah,
Sucking them off. Sucking them off the ship.
Sucking them off the ship. Like, just slurping them off. Finishing them off. Yeah. Oh, God, there's no good way to say this. Like,
oh, God, the Kraken's sucking their dicks. Welcome to Shadows and Sightings, a paranormal comedy podcast where we talk about all things spooky. I'm Taylor.
I'm Nick.
And we've got a fun episode on the deep, dark depths of the ocean today. Legendary sea monsters, sea creatures, fun stuff all around there. Nick brought this episode up last week for us to do, and I was just curious, Nick, what was your starting point for that? What was anything specifically that fascinated you about deep sea monsters?
I have always been obsessed with sea monsters. If UFOs and Bigfoot and cryptids are up there with sea monsters, were always...
That's like in your top 3.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The countless History's Mysteries, when I was a kid, on the History Channel, they had a couple episodes on sea monsters, and that was by far like my favorite episode. It was the coolest thing. Little chunky 10-year-old Nick just sitting in front of DirecTV, just watching,
munching on the popcorn,
munching popcorn,
Doritos,
sipping on Dr. Pepper. It was great.
Was Dr. Pepper your go-to soda back then, or? I never remember you ever drinking a Dr. Pepper ever in my life. You were a Fresca kid.
Well, mom always had Fresca and Dr. Pepper. Those were the two.
Interesting. I never remembered there being Dr. Pepper in your house.
But yeah, you're right. You definitely are at Fresca. It was lit. You know what's crazy? I haven't had one since
then.
Mm-mm.
Wow, just like too much back in the day that just had turned you off from it, or
it's just maybe like once in like or twice in the last like 5 years, and I'm pretty sure that was more or less because Let's Go to Prison. And that was like the inside joke.
Oh my God.
The inside joke. Not
I forgot all about that movie.
Not a Sprite. Not a Mountain Dew. A Fresca. And we were like talking about it. We ended up like getting Frescas, but that's like the only time in like the last maybe 10 years that I've had one.
Wow.
Would not be my...
It wouldn't be your first choice of a soda?
I'm honestly... I
just feel like, because that's one of the few sodas that you can still buy that's like a nostalgic thing. I feel like you would just walk by an aisle in the store, and it's like one of those sodas you don't really like. Coke and Dr. Pepper and stuff, like, yeah, you can just get that anytime. Fresca is one of those that are, you don't just see a Fresca at a Sheetz or something or at a gas station. That's when you got to like kind of actively seek out a little bit, but they're still relatively available. So I feel like
if you have at Sheetz?
I don't think so. Honestly, I've never really looked, but I don't think that I remember seeing a Fresca at Sheetz.
I remember the packaging changed. Back when we were kids, it was the green can with the lime on it, and it had the weird font.
It was like the crispy font.
Crispy, yeah.
It was like here's a crispy drink.
Yeah,
a
like
crispy.
Yeah. Now it's this silver can with like black, like Fresca's like spelled out in black, and it's modern looking.
Of course it is.
It looks like a corporate soda.
I hate that. I hate that
just
so
like
much.
Fresca, like just like
nothing pops about it. Nothing. I hate that so much.
It kind of gives me like Tab vibes.
Oh man.
Yeah.
But Tab, I mean, to Tab's credit, that has never changed. That logo has never changed. I think in the 100 years that Tab soda has been around.
Not so much the logo, but the font.
Yeah.
It's like just like minimalistic, clean.
And that's like the thing now, is to be minimalistic and clean. I have this conversation with my one friend all the time about how at some point we lost that charm, especially fast food places, where we went from like McDonald's having playlands and ball pits, and Taco Bell being bright teal and pink and purple, to these really drab looking corporate spots. And I just hate it. I wish we would bring the charm back. And I hate that it's bleeding into sodas.
It looks like they changed their packaging again. So yeah, they've changed it a couple of times. It's
Well.
But yeah, like I hear what you're saying. Like,
Yeah.
there seems, I think the current push now seems to be 80s nostalgia.
A little bit, yeah. It
The
was
Stranger Things, that whole vibe.
yeah.
Right, with like the
Well, like
80s
it started.
culture.
I feel like the first thing that really started that was Burger King going back to like their old '70s logo. You know, it's not like I kind of miss the '90s logo looking thing, but that lasted up until recently, I guess, when they went back to just the two buns. It says Burger King in the middle.
Yeah.
And then Pepsi kind of followed suit a little bit. They did like a modern version on their classic 80s logo. Like you said, it's like 80s nostalgia. You know, I'm here for it. I'm all for revamping the 80s and 90s logos because they were so bright and vibrant and fun and quirky. And
what was it kind of looks like that on the TV. Like the TV right there.
Oh, the jazz cups.
Is that
the scribble,
like
yeah,
the
like the
90s?
to go.
But it was like everywhere though.
Yeah, it was. It's the
every bowling alley.
Every bowling alley, every gas station had that same print on it. It was called Jazz. You can still buy those cups.
Really?
Yeah, they're great.
I remember that was like the huge night, and the color was like
it's teal and purple. Is like
teal, purple, and like hues of like tan, like no, the Jazz cups, were teal and purple. But the color trend of like the 80s and the 90s, was it called Sonoma, I think?
It could have been. You can still get them. They're right here. It's actually it's on Walmart.
Yeah.
Oh, they have a pint glass on Etsy with that. I might have to get that. That's great. That's so nostalgic. For something so simple. It's for something so simple. It's so nostalgic.
So anything interesting happened to you this week?
Actually, yes. I went to a new place in Emmitsburg called the Carriage House Inn.
Ooh,
and it's a restaurant. Yeah, it's like it's not really like a ritzy place or anything like that, but went there and it's like definitely one of those old timey, like it's been there for a long time.
Sure.
And it's on topic for our episode. Well, not our episode today, but our podcast in general. The one lady was telling me about a couple of the ghost stories that happened there. So, yeah, a lot of shadow figures after guests leave, footsteps walking around, and I was like, man, let's get an interview with like the owner. So outside of that, nothing overly different. Let's talk about some deep sea creatures. Now, when you think of deep sea creatures, again, Nick kind of went deep sea monsters. I also did a little bit of that too, but when you think of a deep sea creature, it's kind of hard to not think about the Kraken being the main one. I feel like that's the Bigfoot of deep sea creatures.
If it's not the Kraken, it's Nessie.
First thing I think of is, just tales of the pirates and Kraken coming up and swallowing their whole ship.
Kraken, I guess some other common ones that come to mind, even if it's not so much like the folkloric or the mythological sense, but even from a fantasy standpoint, Moby Dick is another one that pops up as like a popular sea monster. But
Cthulhu
in some instances.
Like those are like more novelized versions.
Yeah.
Of course, you have all of the like Odyssean from the Odyssey. A lot of those mythological creatures come from that book.
Sirens.
Yep.
Sirens are another one. But yeah, you're right. I would agree with you. I think it's fair to say that when you hear the term sea monster, Kraken probably is the one that comes to mind.
Yeah. And the thing about deep sea monsters to me is, as opposed to cryptids that we talk about on the show all the time, the ocean has only been explored 5%.
Yeah.
So when you put that into perspective, we know more about the solar system than we do our own ocean. So when you think about deep sea cryptids, quote unquote cryptids or monsters or legends, I feel like they're far more believable than even land cryptids. Oh,
for sure. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. You have like all those ancient maps. When I say ancient, I'm talking seafaring maps from 600 years ago, where if you look at them, some of them say like avoid this area, like, sea monsters exist here.
Yeah. And it's like the classic like dragon looking thing in the
exactly,
ocean.
Like a Kraken-esque looking thing. Like and you're right. I mean, 70% of the Earth, the ocean covers 70% of the Earth. We've explored more surface of the moon than we have our own like planet.
I think even more Mars.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the statistic. So, yeah, absolutely. I'm more than sure there's there has to be some giant or a collection of giant creatures that they're not even sea monsters. They're just biological life that we haven't even discovered yet.
Yeah. I mean, to use like a really off the wall comparison, but when you think about like the SpongeBob movie, when SpongeBob and Patrick go into like the giant ravine or they were crossing it to get to
the dark deep,
and they have these huge monsters that are just out of the, even for them as sea creatures themselves, are just
giant,
beyond comprehensive.
Tentacles,
Yeah.
The giant sea creatures, for sure.
And what's the big what's it called, the giant like valley in the ocean,
the Mariana Trench?
Yes, that one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that thing goes presumably almost to the center of the earth or something like that, some shit. Who knows what could be?
I'm not sure how deep it goes, but yeah, it's my understanding. I believe it's the deepest crevice, and we haven't even
couldn't even imagine going there at this point. We just don't have the technology.
If we have the tech even to get down there or not, because the pressure's so immense.
Yeah, I don't know how we'll ever get to the bottom of the ocean, if that's even a possibility, like to the actual very bottom of it.
So there's I thought it was pretty cool. It's called the Seabed 2030 Project. And it's an international initiative to map the entire ocean floor by 2030.
Oh, wow.
And it's a bunch of obviously very wealthy people, government agencies. They're all kind of collaborating together to make this happen. I forget. I think James Cameron was the one that was talking about it.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I first heard about him talking about it because he's like in on it as well, you know?
Well, because that started with the Titanic when he was filming that.
I always thought it was so funny how a movie director is like, his part-time job is a deep sea explorer. And he has,
good for him.
Because he's so rich, obviously, because of his immense wealth.
Because 3 of his movies are the top 3 highest grossing movies of all time.
Yeah. And he with that money, he's pretty much become an amateur deep sea explorer because he can afford
that motherfucker's gonna find the Kraken. He's gonna find it.
He can afford little submarines, like mini subs and submersibles, which
are much better than the Ocean Gate or whatever the fuck it was called. God, that whole thing,
the PS2 controller or whatever. Oh my god,
the Temu Xbox controller going down there.
It was so bad. Those poor people. I can't even imagine. What was the most infuriating thing about that? I know we're sidetracking, but the most infuriating thing about that was he had emails from people below, his engineers and all that, and they were calling him out. They're like, "Hey, don't do this. This is you're going to get somebody killed." And he blatantly was like, "You know what? We have to push the limits of science. You let me worry about that."
And push they did.
Oh my gosh!
Push them right into a watery grave. Davy Jones' locker, as it were.
But the Seabed Project is to create a definitive map of the world's ocean floor, review all features that are 100 meters or larger. So they're not only mapping the floor, but they're also looking for structures, I'm assuming.
Oh, wow. Like Atlantis.
Yeah, I'm sure. but geological structures and stuff like that.
I'm sure there's mountain ranges in the ocean that are so deep on the ocean floor. There's probably mountains in the ocean.
Oh, yeah.
That just is so deep that they're probably taller than any mountains we have.
Yeah. That was that's the whole thing. At one point in time, these the sea level was low enough to where that was, those were the mountains, and then of course whether it was through a flood, whether it was through I'm assuming at some point, and I don't know the science behind it, but I'm assuming at some point. I don't know if you've ever seen Game of Thrones, but the big divide or whatever the fuck it's called, or whatever. I wouldn't be surprised if we had something like that, and that's what we have currently today, where that melted or whatever, and that's why the levels are so. But
I feel like that's what Antarctica essentially was back in prehistoric day. Not
I think
prehistoric.
Antarctica would have been that.
Yeah,
and what we have today is just a fraction of what that probably was at one point in time.
Well, I've seen it was back when pirates were even still sailing to a degree. They would get to Antarctica, and it was just a giant ice shelf, miles, 2 or 3 miles high, and you couldn't sail around it. You couldn't sail to either side. Yeah. So oh, okay, this is where it ends.
The end of the world.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and then that kind of just begs the question with deep sea creatures: if there's mountains under the sea that are 30 times higher than anything we have on land, what lives in the mountains in the sea?
Sure. Yeah. I'm sure that
It's just
there
like
are,
literally, it's a rabbit hole. Well, a rabbit hole is one way, but an ocean-sized hole of possibilities
Yeah.
that could be in the bottom of this vast terrain that we've never experienced or explored.
But kind of talking to what you're saying, with that giant vastness, I think kind of comes the whole thing of fear of the unknown. That's what's kind of fueled these myths, these legends.
That certainly seems to be the case as far back as what I could tell. A lot of, especially the Kraken lore. And I guess we can kind of start with the Kraken. We'll start with the granddaddy.
Hell yeah.
Big Daddy Crack.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if I should call him that.
I'm sure he'd appreciate it.
We'll call him Harvey.
Harvey, yes, Harvey. Yeah, ChatGPT, man, I love it. He was so chill about it.
He loved it.
He's like, I like Harvey. It's cool and fresh, but you can call me Orion instead.
So the Kraken lore basically comes from, and I was kind of surprised to find this out, from the Viking Age. It comes from Icelandic or Norwegian folklore, but kind of begins in Scandinavia. I don't really have a definitive date or year. It's just Viking times, but in Norse mythology, tales of the Kraken emerged as part of the tapestry of sea monsters that haunted the minds of the seafaring Vikings. The legends described a colossal squid-like creature capable of pulling down entire ships with its powerful tentacles. Over time, the Kraken became intertwined with maritime superstitions, especially with Norwegian fishermen who are reportedly seen the beast attack ships in the distance and conjured up all sorts of other sea mischief, causing whirlpools, tidal waves, stuff like that. Historical accounts date back to the 13th century of the Kraken. Some people believe that lends to the credence or the existence of the Kraken. Stories from the mariners of the time described encounters with massive sea creatures that could fit the descriptions of the legendary Kraken. Sailors reported witnessing terrifying tentacles rising from the depths, capable of crushing ships and dragging them into the abyss. The consistency of the tales, though, varied enough that skepticism has prevailed so far. So when I think of the Kraken, probably like most people, I think of Pirates of the Caribbean, and that being associated with pirate times. I never considered the Kraken being Norwegian or Norse mythology. Yeah. I guess most people would theorize that trying to explain the Kraken is that it's a giant squid. And since we have scientific evidence of giant squids existing, there's the theories that it's a kind of the father of giant squids or a distant relative of giant squids, but they are a real thing that exists. So that lends some credence to the fact that a Kraken could exist, I suppose.
Yep, and even then, the modern giant squid, we only recently, within the last 10 to 15 years, got a specimen, like actually was able to catch a specimen and verify that, okay, we know these things exist.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I read somewhere it was, I'm blanking on the number, it was either 5 or 500, but we either have less than 5 or less than 500 actual specimens of squids. I think it's 5. I feel like 5 is the number.
That would be, because I remember when they finally caught one, because they aired it on Nat Geo, probably 10, 15 years ago, maybe. There was like a TV special that they finally caught it, and they were all talking about it. And the crazy thing about it is, there for a while, I don't know, have you ever seen the photo of the one?
Yeah.
It was like a blue grainy photo and like a white like squid or whatever, and that was the first like footage that
it was like, holy shit.
Yeah, this thing is out there. We know it exists. We finally have caught one on camera. And for a while they had speculation that they existed because sperm whales, or I think it's sperm whales, would have the scars,
right,
like on the skin and all that, and they're saying, oh, something is like fighting this thing or whatever.
Yeah, they would have tentacle marks with like teeth marks in the where the suction cups would have been. And washed ashore sperm whales. Yeah. It
was, and then so we kind of put 2 and 2 together, and then finally they caught it. Up until recently, the giant squid was actually seen as a cryptid.
A myth.
They were like, I don't think these.
I think that was more like scientists believed it was just a past thing from like the prehistoric dinosaur times.
Yeah, something.
They didn't still exist, but
when they started finding evidence, they're like, hey, I think there's something out there.
Yeah. And for those that maybe are unaware, giant squids are essentially the biggest one that I think that they've found was 45 feet long. So you can imagine if you're a Viking in this time frame, if you encounter a giant squid, a 45-foot long squid, that is going to be terrifying.
Yep.
You know, your longboat, if that's what you're sailing in, I'm sure Vikings had maybe other means of travel for long distance, but longboats are what I associate Vikings with.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you see a squid twice the size of your boat swimming under you or by you.
You see tentacles like come up, like wrap around or whatever. Yeah. And but pulls your ship down.
Yeah.
The freaking eye is the size of like a dinner plate that
Right.
you just like were eating your steak off the night before. Like, you know, like
It just comes up like slowly next to the ship. It just looks at you.
just blinks. It's like, huh.
Yeah. It turns slightly to the left, like, hi. Can I help you, giant squid?
Yeah, like,
But the Kraken itself is much, much larger, obviously. It was a deep sea monster that could theoretically take out an entire crew of a pirate ship or take down an entire ship with just its tentacles without ever seeing the rest of it. So this thing, by the time the 17th century or pirates in the 1700s get a hold of the tail, it's a bona fide monster.
there's something. It's a tale. It exists. So is this, you're talking about the Scandinavia and you know how the Kraken originated from Nordic and then the Scandinavia. Is that, I know that you said the half Gufa. Is that
right?
Like beyond the Kraken, or was that kind of like like in addition to the Kraken?
They're kind of like one and the same, essentially. The half Gufa is a giant. It's almost like a whale, but it's the size of an island. And Vikings supposedly would, you know, see a giant island out in the middle of the ocean. They would go to this island thinking they hit land. They would get off on its back, only for it to be like, nope, we're going down, and just drag them down to their dooms.
Oh my gosh, it'd be terrible. Could you imagine? So this thing, like, if this thing was like as huge as an island, it has. Remember, what was it? But wasn't it Avatar?
Oh, like the Last Airbender?
Yeah, wasn't
it was a giant lion turtle.
Lion turtle, yeah. It was like, I think of that.
Yeah,
I think that was inspired by.
Essentially, that's what it was.
The half, yeah. So this thing is so huge where it has its own ecosystem.
Essentially, it's like trees and stuff living on its back. Yeah. They literally thought it was an island or a landmass, so they would pull up to it, get off, you know, try to start looking around, be like, "Hey, where the fuck are we?" Just for it to start moving and shifting, and then go underwater and take them all with it.
You know what's crazy though is, so there's legends also of islands, moving islands, that the islands have disappeared. Yeah. Even like recent modern times. I mean, it's more or less due to climate change essentially, but there's islands that recently have disappeared due to rising sea levels and all that. But it makes you wonder if maybe there's like some truth to that, because I don't imagine 3 or 4, 5, 6, however many hundred years ago, where, you know, these sailors are out there, that we were really dealing with global warming the way that we are today, you know?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, that's one of those just topics of debate. Yeah, the Earth naturally cools and heats every couple hundred or thousand years or so. So I mean, it's a cycle. It's a cycle.
Yeah. So I mean, moving islands, but disappearing islands or whatever. How many of those could have been like
just
half goofus?
Yeah, exactly. Like just a roving band of them just strolled around. But the first modern era kind of version of the Kraken was, like I said, it was mostly in like the 1700s. A couple of different people had descriptions of what the Kraken looked like. One came from, I'm going to probably butcher these names because they're 1700 Frenchmen and stuff like that. You had Francesco Negri in 1700. His description was followed up in 1734 by an account from Dano-Norwegian missionary and explorer Hans Edged. Hans described the Kraken in detail and equated it with the Hafgufa, as you mentioned. However, the first description of the creature being a octopus-looking type goes to Danish bishop Pontoppidan in 1753. He wrote a description in detail of what it looked like. He wrote that it had a reputation for pulling down ships and was a cephalopod of tremendous size.
Look at that cephalopod and its tremendous size.
Cephalopod sounds like such a dirty word. I don't know what it is. It sounds like a...
Yeah, I guess. It's kind of... It's weird. It's weird. It's an odd term.
The great man-killing octopus version of the Kraken entered French fiction when novelist Victor Hugo introduced the pieuvre octopus of Guernsey lore, which he identified with the Kraken of legend.
So then it kind of sounds like different cultures where the Kraken is more of a generic term of just a giant sea monster kind of roaming the ocean.
A giant squid, yeah.
Yeah. And they kind of there's some slight variations from culture to culture
Right.
as to
Like the Vikings weren't describing a giant squid this size that could pull down. Of course, they didn't know what 17th century pirate ships look like, but could pull those ships down with relative ease, as opposed to pulling down a 20-foot longboat with ease.
Sure. Yeah.
So they weren't seeing that coming up out of the depths. I feel like it was more giant squid-esque than what we would relatively associate with the Kraken via Pirates of the Caribbean lore, where you don't even see the whole thing. It's just tentacles coming up, and they're huge, and they're just chopping ships in half, and just a wrecking shop,
the sheer might,
causing the giant whirlpools. Like everybody knows that scene from Pirates of the Caribbean where they're fighting in the whirlpool of the Kraken. Yeah. But that's how I guess he destroys most ships, outside of going up to feed on the pirates' crew. Sucking them off, sucking them off the ship,
sucking them off the ship. Like just slurping them off, finishing them off. Yeah. Oh God, there's no good way to say this. Like,
oh God, the Kraken's sucking their dicks.
He's what? He's dragging them to their doom.
He's got one tentacle on the ship. Each suction cup has a dick in it.
Oh God. I saw this on Pornhub once. Like,
I believe they be calling it hentai. So the Kraken is definitely, I think, the granddaddy of the cryptids or deep sea monsters.
Sure.
I think that a lot of that. So I was going to say, just from like a skeptical point of view or a scientific point of view, I think the most logical explanation for it is Vikings seeing a giant squid. Back then, probably more common than what they would be today. But also the fact that you're sailing into uncharted territory for weeks, days, months on end. And I mean, I feel like hallucinations.
You're going to see your mind like, plays. Yeah.
You're visual matrixing things, and you're seeing out in the distance other ships getting torn apart by something that you can't actually see.
Yeah.
And word of mouth just begins to spread, and they see a giant squid, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and like I was saying earlier, it's kind of natural for us, like humans, to when we don't really understand something, when we have no context to kind of put things together, our mind will try to do that for us.
Right.
So and then that's where superstitions, and that's where fear, and all those things kind of culminate together.
Right.
And we get these legends. We get these, we're trying to make sense of something that we have no idea how to understand yet.
Right.
So yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from.
And I'm also kind of wondering if maybe it was a means to dissuade other. I mean, Vikings they were kind of tribes, right? They kind of had different societies, and they were kind of always warring with each other. I wonder if that was a way to dissuade the other tribes from encroaching on their trade routes.
Could have been social control. Yeah, like it means psychological warfare.
Yeah,
fear. Yeah.
One theory that I did come across to kind of get back into the scientific aspect of it, it attributes Kraken sightings to tectonic activity and seismic events. So some scientists speculate that the earthquakes or underwater volcanic eruptions could disturb the ocean's equilibrium, causing massive creatures to rise from the depths. So that could be a thing.
So, yeah, maybe we don't see so many of them today, or they're so hard to come by because they only show up during
seismic events under
the water, under the ocean.
Yeah.
Kind of. I mean, yeah, that's a crazy theory, but it's kind of cool. Actually.
It's crazy enough to work.
Yeah, I wouldn't. But yeah, okay.
Like of all the theories that I could come up with, of tectonic plates shifting and volcanic eruptions displacing krakens, or the Kraken,
or giant sea creatures in general.
Yeah, to come up further to the shore for a little while to attack people for whatever reason. It's just tough.
It's not even to attack people. It's probably just they come up to the ocean or the surface.
Yeah.
And because their habitat's been disturbed, and they just happen to find, ooh, what's this?
Wooden ship.
So that's the Kraken. And there's other sea creatures too that kind of, have permeated their way into like our psyche or, history and all that. So another one's called the Leviathan, which is a sea serpent. Sometimes it's referred to as like a sea serpent demon. But it's more from like a biblical standpoint. Yeah. So the Leviathan shows up in the Bible. It shows up in the Hebrew text as well. In the Bible, he shows up in the book of Job, the book of Isaiah, and the book of Enoch. The Leviathan is often an embodiment of chaos, threatening to eat the damned when their lives are over. In the end, it is annihilated.
Yeah, so, I've seen that it was essentially it was like a toy for God to play with. He was the only one that could destroy it. Nothing else on earth could destroy it besides God, and then he destroyed it in the Battle of Armageddon.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's just kind of like Jormungandr a little bit.
Yeah,
kind of. But I remember reading like the text about it when I was a kid, and it's like spears can't break its hide or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty like indestructible. I think it has like the scales made out of bronze or something like that.
Of course it does.
It's something.
It's got plot armor.
Yeah, but so it kind of depends on how you approach it. Some people take it as like a literal explanation of a sea creature. Others kind of look at it as like it's more of like a metaphorical type of representation in the Bible.
And like you said, bringing up Jormungandr, also known as the Midgard serpent, was another one kind of similar in that sense. So Jormungandr is a Norse mythology or Viking Age tale as well. It was a serpent created by Loki, and Angrboda created this giant sea serpent that was so large it circles the entire earth, and its mouth is biting its tail constantly. Mm-hmm. When he stops biting his tail, that's the beginning of Ragnarok. So Thor tries to catch it. He goes fishing with a giant, tries to catch it, uses an ox's head to bait it, and he catches it, and then the giant convinces him, or he cuts the line. So Thor caught it and tried to kill it first, and then he was able to get away. The second time was actually during Ragnarok. I think they fought 3 times, or they encountered each other 3 times. The second time, I think he was disguised as like a cat or something, and Loki tried to get him to lift it, and he couldn't lift it. Something crazy. But the third time was when Ragnarok was happening. Thor was able to kill Jormungandr, only for Jormungandr's venom to kill Thor as well. So the prophecy of the gods dying was fulfilled, but at the same time, Thor saves, quote unquote, the earth from Jormungandr devouring it.
Yeah. So, and I think it's so cool how a lot of ancient cultures displaced by islands and miles of ocean and land or whatever. If you dig through each one of their individual mythos and stuff like that, you find so many similarities.
Yeah, we talked about that in another episode. It's just incredible to me how so many cultures have so many similar stories.
Yeah, like the flood, the giants,
their pantheon of gods are so similar.
Yeah, exactly. There's like an explanation for everything.
Yeah.
But the Leviathan of the book of Job is a reflection of the older Canaanite Lotan, which was a primeval monster defeated by the god Baal-Hadad. And it parallels to the role of the Mesopotamian Tiamat, defeated by Marduk, and have long been drawn in comparative mythology, in other situations with dragons and world serpents, such as Indra, which I believe is like Indian mythology.
Okay, that's one mythology I'm not familiar with.
Sailing Vitra, and Thor slaying Jormungandr. You want to talk about mythology that's like crazy, that has like a shit ton of stuff? The Indian mythology and like
they've got like 1,000 gods, don't they?
This is just insane. It is nuts. And like just going through and reading some of like their mythos, and it gets like flying palaces and like
it gets wacky.
It gets pretty out there.
Which I mean, a flying palace, I guess, isn't that. I mean, if I'm looking at it from a Norse mythology side of things, you have Asgard, which is, what else is it besides a whole realm of kingdom for the gods? Yeah. It's a flying palace.
Yep.
But I just like the idea of these kind of biblical, mythological creatures. Like I said, Jormungandr is so large that he's in the sea, but he's so large he can actually encircle the entire earth. Could you even, a great example of what it would probably look like, God of War, obviously.
I was going to say, seeing when he shows up in God of War, everywhere you look, you see bits and pieces of Jormungandr's body.
I was like, can you imagine, just theoretically speaking, if Jormungandr was real? Obviously, that's one we would have to know existed because he's so large. But to see him rising out of the ocean and being the entire earth, like, That would just be I can't even comprehend what it would look like.
You can't fathom it. Or the strength of Thor to fight this thing and to like lift it up, you know.
Yeah.
Like,
Thor throwing Mjolnir into his head. You played Ragnarok, right? God of War Ragnarok.
Loved it so
and
good.
when you're going to the final level and you see like in the background
them fighting each other.
Oh man, that was
like
so badass.
The hammer
dude.
like going back and forth. Yeah. So we have, you know, the Kraken,
The Leviathan.
I didn't really talk about Nessie in this case because I kind of feel like Nessie deserves his own episode.
Yeah, Nessie deserves its own episode.
Because he's
like iconic. He's like the Kraken. We could have spent an episode talking about the Kraken.
Yeah.
But
yeah, exactly. So we kind of just stuck it to like deep sea.
Nessie's in a lock.
Yeah.
He's not in the sea.
So let's talk about then some of the skeptical, like the modern day explanations, and then, you know, even some like modern day like attacks and stuff, and like instances of like sea monster.
Sure.
So one theory that I've seen this like so many times before, but alleged carcasses. So it's one of those situations where they kind of wash up on the beach. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, oh God, this thing washed up on the beach. It must be a sea monster. Yeah. And people believe it. And then they like kind of do some digging and they're like, oh, it's just
a mangled whale corpse.
Yeah. So you have alleged carcasses. Sea monster corpses have been reported since, you know, recent antiquity. Unidentified carcasses are often called globsters.
Globsters?
Globsters? Yeah. Every time I've read about them, they were just like carcasses.
Yeah,
but apparently there's a term, globsters. I didn't know that. The alleged plesiosaur, netted by the Japanese trawler the Zayumaru off New Zealand, caused a sensation back in the 70s and was immortalized on a Brazilian postage stamp before it was suggested by the FBI to be the decomposing carcass of a basking shark. I don't know if you've ever seen the pictures of that. Have you?
I feel like I don't know if I've seen the pictures of it. I feel like, was there a documentary about it where they...
It's come up a couple of times probably.
Yeah.
But it's literally, it does look like, to be fair, it does look like a plesiosaur. Like the picture, it kind of looks like, you know, like a Nessie.
Right.
Like the way that...
Yes. Okay. Yes, I have seen that.
And, but then, you know, they're like, it's just a basking shark. And I thought this was, not that I was like skeptical about it, but apparently the way they determined that it was a basking shark is, I guess they studied the decomposition of other basking sharks, and apparently the way that they decompose underwater is their like faces kind of decompose first. Gotcha. And then like it kind of progresses down to like the fins and all that. So if you were to find one in like that decomposing state, that it kind of does look like a plesiosaur. Apparently, it's just like the way they.
I wonder if the salt has anything to do with the decomposing state as well, where it could alter it or slow it down or speed it up or whatever the case may be, that it would alter it
down.
You would think so, because like fossilized things, like you cover it in salt or something, it
preserves it. Yeah. It's kind of,
so I'm wondering if like the salt water is slowing down the deterioration fast enough that, like you said, it starts on the face. So then it's like so slow that by the time it washes on shore, it's a thing that should have been decomposed like months ago. But the salt's keeping it from, it's like mangling it and changing its form so much.
Could be.
And the tides and the currents just pulling and stretching. And, you know, these are things I think about. What about, I know they're not really deep sea things, but like mermaids also washing up on shore. Have you seen like the videos of...
I haven't heard of...
There was a time where, and it probably was more than likely an internet hoax, but there was like videos coming out all over the place of mermaids, quote unquote, washing up on shores, and they would walk over to them and it would look like a person in a fish body. And I don't know if it was a hoax, if it was...
Yeah, I remember those back in like the 2010s.
It's like 2013s, 2014s of the world. Yeah,
I remember those. Yeah, it was... I saw, there was one, it was a shark, but they had it propped up on a chair. Yeah. And it looked like a face.
Right.
But it was a type of shark. If it's just like that's face suckers looking over.
Yeah.
It's like, we caught a mermaid. Yeah. And it's just like,
I don't want to derail you too much, but did you see the video on the mermaid subject of the guy that's working on a cargo ship, and it's like pitch black, middle of the night, and all they have is the light of the ship, but you can hear like the singing.
I did.
And he's
see
like
that.
going from ship side to side, and you can hear it, and then you see like the shadows like jumping in the water.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I did see that. It very creepy.
It's very creepy. That's, again, you got to take it with a grain of salt, because you can do anything with the internet these days.
For sure.
I thought it was so cool because, man, you think about like mermaids being like Little Mermaid or whatever, but reality is
No,
like folklore or
they're pretty
the pirate
vicious.
tales are like, they're ruthless.
They're pretty malicious. Yeah. they're not friendly at all.
Yeah.
So we have, the carcasses essentially that's like one form of proof that, I'm gonna call them again the believers and the skeptics, but the believers of sea monsters kind of use it as proof. Oh, well, how do you explain this thing washed up on shore? And then the skeptics come in and they try to explain like that's whale blubber,
Yeah, right.
Another popular kind of like a modern day where it's not really like a sea monster. It kind of alludes to a sea monster, or at least it's one of the beliefs behind it.
Have you heard of the Japanese folklore, the ningen?
Mm-mm.
That was kind of what I was talking about earlier. It's an aquatic humanoid whale-like mermaid creature, supposedly inhabiting the sub-Antarctic oceans. What reminded me of this was in 2005, Google Earth actually captured what some people believe to be one near the southern oceans, and skeptics came in and said that it was actually just an iceberg that coincidentally looked like the sea monster, the ningen. And then again in 2010, they published a YouTube video showing the ocean life that they observed. Near the end of the video, a large creature with small eyes and a large smiling slit-like mouth was spotted lying on the ocean floor. So of course, some people say that was the ningen, and it was countered by the suggestion that it was most likely a snaggletooth snake eel. So kind of like what you're saying, there's going to be people on both sides saying that it's this thing, and then the skeptics or scientists are going to be on the opposite side.
Thing. Okay, yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember seeing this.
Yeah, that thing is creepy, man.
Yeah, it looks pretty weird. So a modern. So we have like instances where it's like the ningen or whatever, where it's like modern. Right. This is like a modern cryptid sea creature thing. Then we also have unexplainable sounds in the ocean, and we're trying to determine if this is like a creature or something, but the most iconic one was called the bloop.
Yes, and I've been interested to hear about this like all week.
Yeah,
because I've never heard of it until you mentioned it last week when we were talking.
Yeah, the bloop. So it was a loud, low-frequency sound recorded in the Pacific Ocean in 1997.
What a great year.
Right. And it was sponsored, or it was sponsored. It was captured.
It was sponsored by Sony. Ironically, who put out Men in Black in 1997.
It's all coming together.
It's all connected.
NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Oh, man, what a good acronym.
NOAA.
They knew what they were doing.
Yeah. Actually, it's
splitting the sea.
Discovered that the bloop was caused by an ice quake. Which is when an iceberg breaks away from a glacier.
Okay.
By 2012, earlier speculation that the sound originated from a marine animal was replaced by NOAA's description of the sound as being consistent with noises generated via non-tectonic cryosysms. It's just a fancy term for, ice quakes, originating from glacial movements such as ice calving. So I think prior to 2012, there was a lot of speculation that, okay, this was like a creature that,
right,
because it was heard in such a vast range. I think it was like 3,000 miles.
Oh, wow.
Was like the distance that
I would have not expected a glacier to be able to make that kind of a noise.
Well, and I think that was their expectation too, was like, they knew that they could make noises like that, but it was maybe just not common. So the sound source was roughly triangulated in a remote point of the South Pacific Ocean, west of the southern tip of South America. The sound was detected by Equatorial Pacific Ocean Autonomous Hydrophone Array. It's a system.
What's the acronym for that?
It doesn't have one.
They need to work on one.
But basically, it's a system of like scanners that NOAA designed to kind of capture like frequencies and stuff like that. But it kind of works in tandem with the U.S. Navy's sound surveillance system, SUSAS. So NOAA designed this system, and it kind of works in tandem with the Navy's, and it kind of augments it. Of course, the Navy sound system, the reason why they kind of paired them together was that was designed back in the day to detect Russian submarines.
Okay.
According to NOAA, the sound rose in frequency over about 1 minute and was sufficient amplitude to be heard over multiple sensors at a range of over 5,000 kilometers or 3,000 miles. So,
damn.
Yeah, this I think it's a common misconception where people are like, "Oh, it was heard all around the world." I think
3,000 miles is still a large portion. Like that's a lot around.
I mean, yeah, it's like but I don't know if that was like in the circumference of like the world, or if that was like
from like point A to point B
of like going up the coast
right.
of like South America to like the Pacific Ocean or whatever. I
right.
think that's what it was.
Okay,
but still, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah,
of course, and at first I think Noah, and you can actually hear it. You can go on Wikipedia and you can play it, or YouTube, and I look it up, and you can hear the recording of it. It just sounds like
a bloop.
it just sounds like just it's something like how fucking funny would it be if you like play it bloop.
That reminds me of this is off topic, but when they like reconstructed the mummy's vocal cords and like people memed the shit out of it. It was like, and now you're about to hear what a person from ancient Rome or ancient Egypt would have sounded like from reconstructed vocal cords. It's just like the stupidest sound. It was, oh my gosh.
Brittany was playing that the other day. It was like with some pharaoh from like Egypt.
Yeah.
And he clearly sounded like a black guy.
Man, that kills me every time.
Just like, damn.
That's what the bloop was. Just bloop.
Just
and all the scientists like, oh my God, what was that?
But yeah, it's Noah. I think they're pretty confident in saying that it was a form of like ice calving, which ice quakes caused by fracturing movement of large ice masses. So some glacier busting or whatever,
busting a nut
in Antarctica, just splooging its frost everywhere, breaking off the ocean.
That's a sentence you didn't think you were going to hear today. And a glacier busting a nut, splooging its frost everywhere, impregnating the ocean,
just fucking blooping everywhere. And the bloop wasn't the only instance of frequencies being detected like that. There's you can look it up, but there's like other ones called they have like specific names or whatever. But the bloop has been the most iconic one. And, I mean, was it a giant sea monster? I think now as technology has evolved, no, it was pretty confident.
Unequivocally kind of been debunked.
Yeah, exactly. But at first they were kind of like,
back in 1997, anything was possible.
Yeah, they're like, well, this is like before the millennia.
It was a delicate balance in time where mythology and reality meshed perfectly.
But then, of course, now we have, modern day sea monster attacks and stuff.
Now we have modern day equipment and technology that can debunk everything. So they take everything fun away from us.
So in 1978, I always thought this was cool when I heard this one before too, but in 1978, the USS Stein, which was a U.S. Navy frigate, suddenly had an emergency that resulted in an immediate reroute to its home base. The radar system responsible for identifying submarine threats suddenly went unserviceable. So it just like went offline. The Stein headed for land and reached a dry dock so that the engineers could examine the fault, which likely laid somewhere around the massive 27,250 kilogram or 60,000 pound dome attached to the front of the ship's hull.
Damn.
However, upon inspection of the sonar dome, the engineers found something that they weren't expecting. The rubber no-foul coating of the dome was shredded with large tears covering around 8% of the surface. According to a Navy magazine at the time, some tears reaching up to around 4 feet long. The coating was damaged by something with serious power. In fact, huge teeth were left at the bottom of most of the scratches. So it sounds like it was attacked by some sort of like Kraken or squid or whatever. In an effort to understand the Stein monster, Navy biologist F.G. Wood was called to inspect the no-foul coating. He noted that the teeth or claws found on the dome were likely the culprits of the large tears, demonstrating that they perfectly matched the width of each. He concluded it was a massive squid, owing to the structures of the teeth, but didn't rule out that something yet hasn't been found in the ocean. So you have like a Navy biologist looking at this and it's like, oh yeah, that's definitely a squid. But he's also saying, but there's this possibility that it wasn't a squid and it was actually something much larger.
Neither one, you never know.
He just like rolls out of bed with his like cup of coffee.
No, not a cup of coffee. It's rum. It's straight up whiskey.
I get paid for this shit.
Dunking his Pop-Tart in the whiskey. It was probably a squid. Or, what the fuck do I know? I went to college for 10 years.
Got my PhD in marine biology and I'm doing this shit. Like, maybe it was a squid, maybe it wasn't. Could have been a Kraken, could have been a sperm whale. I don't know.
Could have been, my ex-wife. That conniving bitch.
Oh my God.
He's just visibly drunk, sitting at the press conference booth.
It's like it's 10 o'clock in the morning, or
I know what time it is.
No time
We're in international waters. There's no time zones.
There's no time here. Yeah, no. So that was back in 1977. So that's like the most.
Oh, so he was absolutely hammered drunk.
Oh, probably.
It was acceptable then.
So was it the Cthulhu? Was it the Kraken? Was it an abysmal squid? I don't know. I think the fact that what I like about the story is that there's no room for speculation that, maybe they just ran up against some rocks or something and that's what caused the terror. No, there were teeth marks, like visible teeth marks. So it's like, no, this was something biological. This wasn't like,
could have been likely probably a shark or something, but
maybe, I don't know, 60,000 pound rubber insulation.
Could have been a big shark.
A megalodon.
A megalodon. I mean, that could still exist. You have the greatest sea monster that ever existed, Big Caesar from Hey Arnold.
Oh, the sturgeon. I remember that, the sturgeon.
So, like we said, sea monsters are an interesting group of cryptid, if you want to call them cryptid. They're to me, equal parts cryptid, equal parts mythology and folklore. And you don't really think too much about, I know we talk about cryptids and stuff like that. They're so unlikely to exist, like the snallygaster and stuff like that. As much as we want to believe that they will exist, I mean, it's like a 99% chance that they don't.
Sure.
Whereas the ocean, again, we don't know anything about it. Like in the grand scheme of things, we know about it, but we don't know anything about it.
We always talk about how, do you believe like aliens? Like, I would honestly believe in aliens before I would believe in cryptids.
Yeah.
I feel like
aliens are. It kind of goes into that realm where I think that if you don't believe in aliens, you're honestly just doing yourself a disservice, because to think that we're the only intelligent life anywhere and the vastness of the universe is incredibly small brain energy.
Yeah, I can't. You can't even begin to fathom.
There has to be another inhabitable planet somewhere that has intelligent life on it. There has to be.
The odds of us being that one planet with the right conditions to like
in the vast infinite
ever growing universe. Yeah, exactly. But,
so yeah, exactly. I would believe in aliens before I believe in cryptids, but I would also believe in deep sea monsters right below aliens.
I'm more than sure there's biological creatures floating around the ocean that we haven't discovered yet. Some of them are probably huge, or at least we could definitely find remnants of large ones that probably existed at one point in time.
And it would probably, honestly, I would say prehistoric monsters that existed for millions of years could still be breeding, creating new ones in the ocean, and we just don't know anything about it because there's no possible way to know.
Well, I think it's Greenland sharks. It's either Greenland sharks or basking sharks, one of the two. They live extremely long.
Mm-hmm.
The Greenland sharks that we have today alive in our oceans would have been like baby sharks when George Washington was in office.
Holy shit.
That's how they live a couple hundred years.
Damn.
And then
that's crazy to think there's a shark out there that's old as America.
And what's the fossilized that they thought it was like dead, like a dinosaur, but then they found it and they're like, oh shit, this thing's still alive.
Oh my gosh, I hadn't heard of that.
Yeah, coelacanth is an ancient group of lobe-finned fish. It's just like a really old. They thought that they were extinct, like dinosaurs, and then they found them. We still have them floating around the ocean today.
Oh wow!
Like, oh god, they're still alive.
That's crazy.
So yeah, they're still here. They haven't been bred out of extinction or whatever. Yeah. Pokemon made like a I think it's called like a relicanth. Yeah, a relicanth was like a nod to it. So yeah, there's still things in the ocean that live extremely long lives.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if there's other things floating around there too.
And there's things in the ocean that are like biologically just almost unfathomable. They like anglerfish or cuttlefish or whatever. And there are these giant demonic looking fish with lights on their heads to draw in prey.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be a thing. That shouldn't exist. That's terrifying. Who's to say that there's not one of those down in the ocean somewhere that's 400 feet long?
Something like that.
Who knows?
Yep.
So yeah, I agree. I'm at the point where it's like aliens I would believe above anything because again, how can you not believe in? We can't be the only ones. We just can't be. And then I would say deep sea monsters because there's just no possible scientific way to totally debunk. It's just too vast of a space to ever explore, to ever to know. And the pressure and the ecosystems and like there's no way to touch it. It's completely untainted. They could grow and grow and grow and never be harmed or their habitat ever be changed in any way besides tectonic plate movement.
Yeah.
So I would believe them second. And then like I'm a big believer in ghosts. So ghosts would be like third. And then cryptids.
Sure. Yeah.
And then belief in like the U.S. government is like 10.
Yeah. I take everything with the government with a grain of salt. Like I don't trust you guys at all. Like not about that.
And then the internet. Like you believe the internet the least. Nothing you see on the internet's true.
I believe Reddit before I believe anything. If it's on Reddit, it's real.
Exactly.
Just some of the shit on Reddit you just like read. I kind of just laugh. I'm like, what? I don't know. It's even scarier than that though. It was like, so you read that, but then you read like the 500 comments on it, and it's like, oh wow. So it's not just you. It's like all of you.
It's a lot of
it's
people.
a lot of people believe it. So.
You're manifesting this at this point. You're all believing it enough that it's going to come true.
Yeah. No, thanks. Now because of you, Slender Man's showing up at my door.
Not again. Not again.
Fucking Slender Man. Trying to sell me newspaper.
Goddamn salad fingers.
Oh, God.
But thanks for joining us on this episode of Shadows and Sightings. If you have any deep sea creatures that you're particularly fond of, let us know in the comments or let us know through an email, shadowsandsightings@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Instagram, Shadows and Sightings, a paranormal podcast, and Shadows and Sightings pod. We're always looking for new stories, new ghost stories, new cryptid stories, new alien stories. Any stories you might have. Have you been out on a cruise and heard a siren or a mermaid? Or did you see a Kraken attack another ship and you didn't tell anybody? Shame on you if you did.
I don't blame you. I wouldn't tell anybody. I would have kept that shit hush hush. Because now you got to do paperwork.
Nobody
wants
likes
to do
paperwork.
that shit.
But we appreciate everybody's supporting of the show still. And as long as you guys are listening, we're going to keep on chugging. So anything you want to add to this episode, Nick? Any final thoughts on deep sea cryptids? What are your thoughts on deep seas monsters? What are you thinking over there?
No, I am a firm believer. And when I say sea monsters and deep sea, it's not so much the mythos part of it, like the folkloric. I think those stories stem
like
from
the actual meat and potatoes, like scientific evidence.
I think we have those stories because people at sea back then probably did see things that they couldn't understand. Probably did witness like some pretty crazy shit.
Yeah,
and then
what a time to be alive.
Yeah, and you tell these stories to your other seafaring coworkers and stuff, and your family and friends and word of mouth and all that. But because we're improving with like scientific research and we're continuing to advance, like we said, like with the seabed project and 2030 seabed project and all that, I'm more than confident that a lot of these stories are just undiscovered, creatures that are probably just really large.
Yeah.
And up until now, because our technology hasn't been able to detect them, that's what it is. So.
Yeah. I agree with everything you just said. Glad we're on the same page here.
Yeah.
Sea monsters, they're real.
Yeah.
Go support your local sea monster.
I guess I could have just said that, but I'm feeling this coffee. This coffee's got me.
I'm ready to record a whole nother episode.
I feel like that right now. I'm like, he told me to slow down. I'm like, man, I'm really feeling this fucking coffee.
You feel like the mummy.
Yeah.
So again, with that, thank you guys for listening to this episode of Shadows and Sightings. Leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening to. We see that you're listening. We have the data to support the fact that we're getting some new listeners every time that we get drop new episodes. So keep telling your friends about us.
Spread the word.
Tell your family. Tell your paranormal enthusiasts.
Tell your pastor. Tell your barber. Tell your hairdresser.
Or in the weird case that your pastor is also your hairdresser, there's two in one stone. Two birds, one stone.
Maybe they have split personalities. Maybe your pastor's a drag queen. I don't know. We all have our pleasures. Spread the word.
If you're in any paranormal conventions coming up or any paranormal things, let us know about them and tell people at those conventions about us, because that's our audience. That's the people we want to get in contact with. That's our community, the cryptics out there of the world.
Cryptic army, the ever-growing cryptic army.
Trademark it. Thanks again, guys. We'll see you on the next episode when we talk about all things spooky. Is this going to be your first cruise?
It will be my first cruise. Yeah.
Well, it just coincides with our topic today. Hopefully, you don't run into any of our deep sea.
I will be so mad if I don't see at least
one Kraken.
If I walk out on that observation deck, and I don't see off in the distance a pirate ship being dragged to its doom,